Good morning, everybody. I'm Terry Ann, and I'm thrilled to be your guide on this journey. Welcome to this transformative adventure where we delve into different stories, provide insights, and navigate the path of healing together. I am your host, Terry Ann Russell. So let's dive right in today. And our topic is it's all fun and games until someone has a spiritual awakening. And I loved when my guides gave me this title last week because it's so profound yet so true. Um, it really makes sense when you begin your journey into the spiritual awakening. Many things change. People think it's really about, oh, I just sort of, found myself and did self-love and took baths and ran through the flowers, but it's nothing like that. So let's talk about first, what is a spiritual awakening? So a spiritual awakening is a transformation. It's a shift in your perspective, your consciousness, and your up-leveling. You begin to get insight from a deeper, more spiritual place. You start questioning the things around you, things you've always done, things, people you've always seen, the job you've had, and things start to shift and change. Um, this transformation is just a shift of your entire world from the inside to the outside. And what I've found on my spiritual journey is there has been many periods of spiritual awakenings. It wasn't just one spiritual awakening that awakened me. There were actually several spiritual awakenings that I've had throughout my journey. And probably I can remember going back to a child and thinking about things that had happened to me at the time and me questioning, like, there had to be more out there. I know that I was missing something. And so as a young child, I was inquisitive and I had all these questions that I didn't have answers to. We're going to talk a little bit about the shift in your world with my book, Reaching for You. And this is Mother Mary's workbook for spiritual transformation. I'll tell you a little bit about this. I um, channeled this book from Mother Mary about 2 years after the death of my son. I began deeply grieving again. We were already traveling on the road. We had been guided to sell everything, go on the road, homeschool my daughter after the pandemic. So many things had changed in our lives. We were on a new path of trajectory that I was being guided to. And as crazy as it seems, we had to sort of follow what they were. And luckily, my husband was on board. He jumped right in with me, and we started our journey together. But that's when this book came about. Many miraculous changes came from this book. And not just for me, some of the people that I've talked to that started reading this book, they've had their own connections with Mary. They've dived into a deeper aspect of who they are, what they're here for. And so this 12 transformations take you through that process. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the veil of illusion. And I want to go back to talking about how integration is not easy. As I read here, it says, as you let go of past beliefs, conditioning, and patterns of thoughts and feelings, your body becomes lighter. Your frequency rises, lifting your consciousness up from the base levels of existence, anchored in the physical world. So think about it. Many times we're so anchored in the physical world. I know for me, starting out, it was get a job at corporate, have a family, live in the same place for 20 years. Those sort of beliefs, thoughts, that was anchored in my physical world. It feels wonderful as soon as you realize there's more work to do, more to release from other layers from your energetic field. It feels like you are peeling back the layers. More true, authentic self is revealed to you, and it takes you deep into your mind and the thought forms and archetypes behind the scenes that shape everything you experience mentally. You also go deep into the body at the cellular level that shapes everything you experience physically. So Mary talks a little bit here about the veil of illusion. And at this point, we had been traveling on the road a few months. And this transmission, specifically transmission 6, brought me to my knees. I had this veil of illusion, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's the veil of illusion ripped off, and it turned my world upside down. I'll read you a little bit here. I saw people for who they were. I could see those who had my best interests at heart and those with ill intentions. It's quite simple, actually. Everything shows in their aura, their energy field. There's no hiding and there's no disguising it. I can honestly say I was not prepared for this phase. Lifting the veil was a huge shock to my system. So much of what I thought was real and true was just a vapor of illusion. But now you can know the truth, especially in your relationship with other people. You can choose who you wish to spend time with. This transmission 6, the light of forgiveness, asks you to forgive people and forgive yourself for not knowing who they really were. Begin to setting boundaries. And if setting boundaries doesn't work, pull them up like weeds in your garden. They cannot go with you where you're going. This will be hard for some of you to understand, but it's necessary and it will be revealed in time. That really spoke to me to share with you today because the spiritual awakening is like that. We begin to shift our perspective, we begin to transform, we begin to feel detached, restless. We begin to question the norm, right? Something you've always done. Why am I not happy in what I'm doing? You're questioning more. Maybe your intuition is becoming enhanced, right? So often our intuition begins to expand during these periods of spiritual awakening, right? We've all had these gifts, but many times they've been turned off. So we go back and we look at that through the spiritual awakening. This is starting to happen now. And I've had clients come in time and time again and say they feel like they're losing their mind. They're seeing things, whether it be words or what people are really like, or having dreams about changing their geographic location or changing jobs or leaving a marriage. Oftentimes, these are catalysts. For me, it was a near-death experience when I experienced my first really known to me spiritual awakening back in 2016. I had a near-death experience. It happened all very quickly. I had gotten sick. I had an upper respiratory infection, and about 2 weeks prior to my near-death experience, I had a premonition that I was going to go into cardiac arrest, and it scared the hell out of me. I told my husband, I was like, you need to watch me. I saw this vision that I'm going to have cardiac arrest, and he's like, oh, you're just being dramatic. You're overreacting. You'll be fine. So I sort of also just pushed that away, right? I was like, okay, I'm sure maybe it was just a nightmare. Maybe I didn't really see it, right? I tried to push away all those thoughts about it that I had that made them not real. 2 weeks later, I was still very ill. My husband gave me a baby dose of our daughter's albuterol, and I went into cardiac arrest. They called 911. So what was different for me about the premonition versus the near-death experience? With the premonition, I didn't really feel or understand what that all was when I was there. It was like I was an observer of what was happening. But during the near-death experience, I was up and out of my body, and I can describe to my husband everything that was going on, everything that they were doing to me. I could see my daughter in the room crying, my husband crying. And in the near-death experience, I went further and further away. It was like I was leaving, but not really leaving. It's so hard to put into physical, tangible words to describe the feeling that I had. I felt this overwhelming peace and love within myself. I knew what I was leaving, but I was going and I was okay with it. It was transformative in my life, how that experience created this new spiritual awakening for me, because then I was like, okay, like everything I've known is not really true, right? And you start to question these things. So for me, it was the near-death experience in 2016 that began this spiritual awakening for me. Typically, there's a few stages of the spiritual awakening. Uh, the first is upheaval, and the second is separation. I'm just going to delve into those two this morning. There is 5 stages, I believe, of the spiritual awakening, and each are very in-depth. So the upheaval stage begins in one or more areas. For me, it was the illness. Later, it was my daughter being sick. And finally, it was the death of my son that would require me to move through this illusion that we live in this world, this physical, tangible world, that we are 3D beings in a physical world, but we are a spiritual being, and we have those connections through our upper chakras through the to the higher dimensions. And then there's the separation stage. Now, the separation stage requires you to be alone. It requires you to spend a lot of time going inward, focusing on what it really is that's holding you back. You know, what is it that you want to change? Where are you going? Getting that insight from your higher self, your guides, your angels, and bringing it now to your awareness, so that now you can go forward and make changes in your life that are bringing you through this spiritual awakening. Sometimes the spiritual awakening can bring you to a dark night of the soul. Dark night of the soul is a term that's coined for exactly what it sounds like. It's a huge upheaval of just a lot of stuff going on in your life. It's transformative. The death of my son brought me through a dark night of my soul. I talk about this often when I speak. I was suicidal. I faced many challenges those few months after he transitioned, in being able to make a clear decision through that to be able to stay on earth. That dark night of the soul for me was transformative. It brought me through a new place of understanding that I would not be at if I had not had that experience with the dark night of the soul. That's not to say that everybody goes through a dark night of the soul with their spiritual awakening, but often people are brought to this awareness through circumstances that cause them then to feel this pain and sorrow, to go deeper within and understand, why are they here? What are they doing? These life-changing events sometimes can be divorce, separation. The death of a loved one often happens because with the death of a loved one, you're starting to understand on a deeper level that there are other realms. Your loved one just doesn't die and go off and never to be seen again. My son is very active in my life, often because I get very busy in the physical world, and I have a family. Even when I'm not spending that time in meditation or alone as I should, he'll come in and give me a little nudge of the reminder. So I'm not calling him in, but he's coming in. I begin to feel his energy and I begin to start to see him, feel him. So you begin to understand this deep connection with the divine, right? You understand that a spiritual awakening is an invitation to trust and embrace yourself, not just your beliefs, thoughts, or patterns. So this is what you were taught when you were a child, as I said earlier. And now you're moving forward into this new space, right? And so through this spiritual awakening, we want to let go of what those beliefs, thoughts, and patterns were. And in the Mary book, I write a little bit about that. When you're preparing to do such work as the 12 transformations, there's some prep work that goes into doing channeling, meditation, connecting with the divine. On page 31, I talk a little bit about the preparations. To prepare for channeling and transmission work, I like to do a grounding meditation that keeps me anchored in my body because I tend to leave my body often. I listen to Salvaggio frequencies and binaural beats. This brings my physical body into a place of relaxation. I tune my chakras, so I use energy healing to go in and clear, heal, and align my chakras, my Hara line also. I always light a white candle, and I'm preparing for what that is, right? Like white candle is about purity. I burn sage, clear away any energies that I don't want present. I diffuse essential oils, which I love. It just brings me to another level of awareness because now I have the smell involved. And then high frequency crystals. I use all that when I'm preparing to channel. And I think it's important for setting that sacred space. You'll find as you begin a spiritual journey, many things will change. And not only the way that you did things before, now you'll start to do things differently. What I always find fascinating is, and not just for me, many people that I've talked to on my journey, maybe it's a book. They're at the store or at their library, and this book just sort of falls off the shelf in front of them. Here it is, come read me. And so I'm always amazed at how the divine works behind the scenes and says, okay, now this is what you need to look at. And oftentimes it's a little nudge into what you're really interested in or what your path, your progression is leaning towards. Since I was a child, I loved rocks and gems. And I remember being on a child, I grew up in New York on Long Island, and we would go to different science centers, and they always had these little gemstones or rocks like amethyst and quartz. And I would always be amazed at how I was so drawn to those, right? I had friends that were drawn to more the fossil type rocks that we would see when we were little. So there's often things, especially when you're a child, that you enjoy or that you're drawn to. And so they're part of what that progression is for you. No spiritual journey is the same. Our spiritual journey, our spiritual awakening, everybody's so vastly different. I always say I don't do subtlety. So sometimes I need that hit on the head and it says, hey, this is time. It's time for you to look at what this is. That's me because that's the way that I am while I'm in this human form. But others, maybe you do subtlety. Maybe it can be numbers that you see. Often we talk about numerology. That begins to enhance, or you'll see 111 or 222, or these numbers start becoming very present in your life. Some people, that's what they see. So it's very different for everybody. There's not just one way of doing things or becoming awake. Right now, the progression is very quickly because of the energies that we're in. For me, it took time to progress when I started becoming spiritually awakened. But for others right now, especially, it's like this. They're awake and they're like, oh my gosh, like what is going on? You know, I remember the first time we moved to Sedona, and that's why I put the picture up today in my background. But the first time we moved to Sedona, and those that are of you that are listening on my podcast, Sedona is a very spiritual place. There's beautiful red rocks that are full of magnificent energy. And they have vortexes, which also create energy, masculine and feminine. But for me, I remember moving to Sedona, being drawn to specific areas And I didn't know anything about vortexes then. I didn't know anything about spirituality really. And I would go and I would sit and I would connect with the energy of the mountains in meditations, and I would see things. I would see portals, or I would hear things about people that I needed to see. And that's how my path really began. I would get numbers and I would start receiving these zip codes and codes for healing. So that was the progression for me. What happened when I went to move to a spiritual place. Um, and then going on the journey in the RV, we began to travel. Like I said, it was the pandemic after the death of my son, and I just needed to be in a freer space for myself to allow it to expand greatly. Luckily for me, I had a wonderfully supportive husband that was willing to sell our business. My daughter was being homeschooled already because of the pandemic, so that didn't really require a lot of change for us. I was already doing that. And when I got the information to go on the road, I accepted, and our family joined together and we took that adventure, and we spent a year traveling to places where I was guided to. And that's when Reaching for You was born. And through that, Reaching for You changed my entire life, and it brought me back to a piece of me that I had been missing. And through these transmissions, there's a gift, right? They begin to guide you on this spiritual path, a shifting out of that old program. Often we get times we get so stuck into what that old program is, we can't really pull ourselves out of it. Sometimes we need a little help, and that's okay. Um, Sometimes you are guided to people. As I said, I was guided to Rosalind Reynolds, who was my mentor and co-worker, and Ivory Lanou at the Sedona Soul Sisters in Sedona. And I had not heard of them. And I was so embarrassed and so afraid to walk in. I made an appointment. And the first thing I said to her when I walked in was, "You're going to think that I'm crazy, but I was sitting up on this mountain meditating and I heard your name. And I made an appointment. I looked you up and I came to see you." And she said, "I'm not going to think that you're crazy. I hear many stories." And it's funny because now I hear those stories and I get clients that say, "You're going to think I'm crazy, but your video popped up on my phone. I was sitting there doing nothing and my phone came on and a video of you popped up." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." Then I saw you and I was drawn to your energy. So things like that happen all the time. I think with a spiritual journey, it's important to just remember to give yourself grace through this process. I call it the unlayering of everything that's been done, everything you've been taught, everything you've been told, who you should be, who you shouldn't be. So that's a little bit about the spiritual awakening journey. I don't know what the topic next week is going to be, but if you're interested in learning more, subscribe to my channel on YouTube, Terry Ann Russell, the Healing Heart Initiative. Or I have a Facebook group now called The Embodied Soul, and we talk about what it means to be embodied, because we're not just spiritual, we're not just physical, we're mental and emotional also. And so all of those energy bodies, mind, body, spirit, form the Trinity and bring us together as one universal whole being. So I hope you enjoyed that today with me, and I look forward to seeing and connecting with all of you next week.